I'm thrilled to be here, and I have to give particular kudos for the title of this particular panel, because we often talk about AI at a very high concept level. And Frank, I thought you did an excellent job really helping people understand what is AI and what does it mean for your business. And I think that's really important, particularly with respect to your point about getting an AI strategy in place and understand what you have and where you're going. But we need to speak practically about what is AI. We've all heard about it. There's a lot of hype. And now is the time to think about what are the use cases? What does the journey look like? What are some of the obstacles? What are the challenges? And then why are we doing this? What's the return on investment? Why does this matter? So I'm thrilled to be here with a very expert panel. As far as I'm concerned, you've got some of the top people, top thinkers who are going to share with you practical use cases with AI in lending, with a focus on understanding the journey. This is as interactive as we can be in half an hour. If you have a burning question, please do put up your hand and I will come to you personally and take your question, because I think it's important that we not only provide some insight, but that we answer any questions that you guys have. So I'm going to turn to the panel and ask you each to introduce yourself before digging deep into some of the questions I have.
Perfect. Thanks, Carole. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Edwin Fong. I'm actually with Salesforce here in Canada, and I lead our financial services team. And I have a background in tech, but I've actually been with Salesforce for 7.5 years.
I'm Nick Seelert, co-founder and CTO of Senso. My background is actually in the mortgage space. I was an underwriter and working in retention in the alternative subprime space before getting into applying AI to solving a lot of the issues that I had firsthand.
Hi, everyone. Norm Cappell, co-founder of Savvyy. We are building a digital mortgage platform really focusing on institutional lenders as the client.
I guess I'll introduce myself again. So Frank Currie, I head financial services engineering at Google here in Toronto. Most of my background is dealing with high performance compute, quantitative analytics, mainly from a file system, high performance standpoint.
Thank you. And so what I'm going to ask each of you to do is give an example of the use of AI in the lending space in particular. We're going to start with an example, and then we'll roll back and we're going to talk about the journey of how you identified the problem, identified some of the solutions, and some of the obstacles you faced in getting to that final example. Can we start with you?
Sure, absolutely. So an example, I think from a Salesforce perspective with regards to AI, we think about it in the most simplified manner. It's all revolved around the data, is the actual data itself, and actually bringing all of that data into one place that we can leverage as alternative lenders to then segment, for example, our clients and what we want to do with our clients, how we can actually look at information around perhaps loan repayment or accelerating loan repayment. So we're seeing some of those use cases being leveraged across, across the industry today, all over North America as well as Asia, and that's something that we're seeing.
Yeah, so at Senso, we're focused on portfolio management. So identifying the customers that you want to focus on, and then how do you actually engage them in a more meaningful and personalized manner. So our go-to-market was on churn prediction in the mortgage space, and that really drew on my actual background as a retention officer. So every month I would get a stack of files of customers that I had to call that were coming up for renewal. I'd start at the top of the list and I'd work my way down. We'd have different ideas. Let's start with credit score. Let's start with the mortgage balance, XYZ, you name it. We tried it, nothing worked. Without fail, we would get to the last week of the month. We'd call up a customer and we'd be like, hey, it's time to renew your mortgage. Customer would say, sorry, I already went to Scotia, TD, wherever. If you had called me 3 weeks ago, this would be a completely different conversation. And so we tried and tried and tried and couldn't solve it. And so really what we're focused on at Senso is actually surfacing those insights. So you're focused on those customers most likely to turn out first. And then how do you actually engage them in a more personalized manner, especially with this younger age? I'm a millennial, I know. We want to know exactly what applies to me. I don't want just a generic letter in the mail saying, hey, it's time to renew your mortgage. I haven't talked to you in 5 years. So it's understanding who your customer is, getting in front of them before you lose them.
Can I just stop and ask a question on that, though? So what are the different data points that you're looking at to help inform that ultimate profile that you're creating?
Yeah, so we've worked on everything from extracting out from CRM data, taking data directly from business line analysts, as well as partnering with credit bureaus, real estate providers. We're also working with mobile providers trying to get the phone data as well. And so what we're really trying to get at is trying to minimize the amount of data that any lender has to hand over to us so we can bring in our partner data. We're able to anonymize it and actually link it all together. So we actually never know who the customer is or exactly where they live, but we're able to link everything together. So it's a number of different data sources, but yeah.
Yeah, so we tend to capture loan transactions as kind of a fixed state. We capture the terms of the loan, we capture the applicants or borrowers' details, and that's kind of it, and that's not modern data architecture. If you look at the way Google tracks your shopping, not Google, sorry, Amazon tracks your shopping, you know, they will record that you search for diapers. They'll record that you put Pampers in your cart. Then they'll record that you saw the Huggies, you put those in, you took the Pampers out, you changed the quantity, eventually you bought. And they track all those events so they can play the entire transaction back, and they can do that on scale. We want to bring that kind of granularity, that kind of event source data architecture to lending so that we can watch loan production and watch all of the things that an underwriter does or anyone else touching a file as they bring that loan from application to close. And if you do that, then you can really start to have a conversation around how to automate parts of that. The title of our panel is ROI, and let me tell you about some of the near-term return that has nothing to do with AI at all. You put that architecture in place, first of all, you can capture bias, you can capture bad behavior. And so if you think about some of the headlines we've had in the mortgage world the last, say, 3 or 4 years, you can maybe avoid some of those. Or if you want to be less ambitious, you can just make the case internally that your audit life is going to get a lot less painful.
So again, just wanting to drill down before we move on. Is it fair to say then what you're creating is a broader profile? You're tracking people, customer sort of behavior, patterns, trends, using different data sources for the purposes of creating a general profile that helps inform business decisions?
Yeah, a little bit, although I mean, we're really looking as much at the lender staff as we are at the customer. And I think there's a great conversation we had around alternative data and what that means for pricing, and I have a bit of a skeptical view. But in the near term, it's not even alternative data, it's just capturing data a different way, a much more dynamic way.
So I guess I'm going to take a slightly different tack on this in that, so Google works very closely with partners and startups to actually solve some of these problems. So Google has this platform which enables for scale and enables for global presence. And I think that's also a really important thing in that when you look at a lot of Canadian technology companies, they started here, but a lot of their presence and market is actually not in Canada. It's in the States, it's in Europe. So a lot of really good thinking comes out of here, but then when it's applied is elsewhere. We do have interactions, like things that we're looking at is things like anti-money laundering, looking at capital markets, spaces like that, and how we can optimize and help those sort of areas to kind of leverage these technologies. But then critically, coming back down, they can't leverage them if the data is not in the cloud and near this massive compute and storage scale. So how do you actually deal with PII data? How do you transform, abstract, anonymize to get the data across? So I know I'm not answering your question directly, but we kind of are more of that infrastructure play that allows, you know, these guys to kind of do the wonderful things that they do.
Right, and I think there's a consistent theme that I'm hearing, and it started with your presentation, Frank, which is that fundamentally when we're talking about AI, we're really talking about data. We're not talking about the AI as the capability that will allow you to drive insight from the data, but fundamentally you're dealing with data, which as a lawyer, I also deal with all the time. So I'm very sympathetic to some of the complexities that you all face. Let's scale back and let's talk about how you started to identify some of the opportunities. Oftentimes, it is a challenge for companies to find the right problem to solve using technology. How did you do it?
Yeah, so going back to the concept of data, Carole, I think, you know, when we're engaging with a lot of different organizations, I don't think organizations have lack of data today. You know, we walk into financial services institutions, they have data on a customer in their loan origination system, their underwriting system, and all sorts of myriads of actual databases. But I think the key is how do you start to Nick's point, how do you start to leverage all of that data in one central place? So we kind of have obviously Salesforce, a lot of folks know Salesforce as a CRM. We're really evolving that concept of CRM and putting the client really at the center of everything. And, kind of leveraging Salesforce as a platform for what we call the hub, right? So all of our different data points that we have on a specific customer or borrower, surfacing that all within Salesforce. And then we've made some tremendous investments within what we call Einstein, which is an AI layer, to then democratize to what Frank was talking about, to really enable businesses and to leverage AI for everyone. So, for example, I think Nick's example is next best action or next best offer, right? So we have a borrower with a specific product with us, and we're tracking their, their career path or their payments, and perhaps we may want to shift them to another product that's more suitable to them. So it is personalization at scale, but it all comes back to the concept of taking all of this disparate data and bringing it into one central place that then you can quickly leverage.
I think really the biggest problem that we've been trying to focus on is the quality of the data. And so just extracting data out of a CRM has issues. Getting a business line analyst to extract data has issues. Getting it from a data partner that has spent a lot of their own ROI and actually creating a unified vision of that customer is probably your best bet. And so if you look at traditionally how these systems have been set up, you have your mortgage, you have your auto, you have XYZ, and then you have 5 copies of who that customer is and which one is actually correct. Right. And so what we've found is try to get at the source that is the most right of who that customer is and then work out from there. Because otherwise you're going to run into a lot of issues. And like the bottom line with machine learning is garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't have the proper data in order to build models, your model's going to be useless and you're not actually going to have an ROI, period.
Yeah, I only have so much to add to that. I think having a modular setup where you're not replicating data is important, and also having a single architecture that makes sense end to end so that you can track, and I know the Borwell folks are big fans of this, tracking a customer's behavior from first click on an ad all the way to last dollar served.
But let's just to stop on that for a moment. In thinking about all the people in the room here, if they're going back to their companies and they're saying, I heard this great talk about AI, I think it would be great if we were to do something in that area. Sounds like we got a lot of data. What do we do? What would your advice be to each of these individuals to actually think about how you find the problem that's going to be solved using artificial intelligence?
So I'll have a go at this. So there's 2 approaches that I see. One is the next Netflix approach, and the other is to pick things off and build gradually. The Netflix approach was essentially to destroy their main market to create another opportunity. So they used to ship CDs, then they realized that streaming was the way to go. That was a massive risk for them to do that, but they managed to pull it off. Not everyone has the appetite to do those sort of things. I think, your organizations to kind of, like some of you are already doing AI, others you're kind of looking at it. I think you kind of look for some core business priorities that potentially could be disrupted and try and go after them. The problem you can get into AI is you can POC or prototype it to death, and nothing comes out the other end. You just have your tech team, your data scientists, data engineering producing this stuff, and it's like, yeah, that's cool, but how does it tie into business value? So you need to go back at the C-level, understand, what are the top 5 priorities inside of your organizations, and try to attach into those things and build something that could move the ball along a little bit. And the other thing is, with that, take small steps. Don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. It's a common term out there, but give it a go and empower your employees to kind of think through how they could differentiate or build change inside of your organizations.
I think that's very helpful, and I also read some very insightful articles that sort of point you in the direction of identify those things that are sort of routine, manual, rote, repetitive, things you really don't like doing.
Yeah. And that also, it brings up the question of, what people are doing, like call centers. Call centers are primed to be disrupted. And if you're not disrupting your call center, you've got to step back and look at what's going on if you have a call center. But at the same time, you could take 1,000 people and their jobs could be optimized away. But how do you empower those people to step up? So right now, if you're in a call center and you're picking up the phone and it's like, tell me about my mortgage, that could be automated. I think people in the call centers want to apply more knowledge to how they're answering the questions. So it actually empowers people to do something that's a little bit more than banal. They can kind of, how do you motivate them? And I think getting rid of some of these rote kind of boring things can really change the way your organization functions. I know I'm kind of coming off tech, but people are critical to this. Be it from an innovation standpoint, but AI can actually allow them to do super interesting things and get rid of some of the stuff that you turn up to work and it's like, what is this? Why am I doing this?
That's actually a perfect segue to where I'm going. Just quickly on the point of the call center, though, there's a wonderful example that I heard on a podcast where the way AI was being used was to evaluate the speaker's voice to determine whether the relationship between the caller and the speaker was going according to plan, or whether the person on, the call center worker was maybe being a little too aggressive, maybe not aggressive enough.
Sentiment, yeah. It's sentiment analysis, and it's a really powerful tool. You do have to be a little bit careful with it. But it's something where if the tone of the conversation is not going in the right direction, get a human involved. Trigger across to someone who can kind of help. I know this is completely off topic.
No, I actually want to talk about that component. So there's a lot of fear around AI. It's this idea that we're all going to be replaced. And I can tell you in the legal community, we feel that as well. We worry about that all the time. But there is this notion that, Edwin, you and I were talking about that, yes, there are certain things that may be replaced, but one door closes, another one opens. Maybe we can talk about that component of change management that's necessary when you're introducing some pretty fundamental technologies like AI.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to what Frank was talking about with the call center and that whole concept, and we're seeing that a lot as well, is how do we leverage AI to start to think about call centers as more of a profit center versus a cost center, right? And what business value does a call center actually, and every engagement within that call center that we can actually leverage. So by empowering the actual agents to leverage something like AI, we can use this as an enabler, for that agent to deepen that relationship in that engagement while they're having that interaction, but then also use it as a coaching, coaching mechanism as well, to kind of leverage AI to coach some of these agents. What we're seeing, the tenure for agents in call centers are short, right? There's a lot of turnover, and part of it is, like Frank mentioned, folks will come in, they'll get bored of the job and they want to move on. So how do we use this technology of AI to continuously enable our staff and keep them at the, I'll call it the bleeding edge of, something they want to do. And most of them are millennials in the call center as well. So they'll actually embrace this type of technology because it actually will make them better and also improve the organization's, relationship with that client.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, don't just invest in your tech, invest in your people too. I mean, when you're starting a company, you have a million things you need to do. And ultimately what you're trying to get at is get your runway long enough so that you're firing yourself from each one of those positions so that you can move on to the next one. Really, that's like your own self-drive. Impart that value on your actual employees too. Make them understand that, yes, you know what, your job is going to change with all this technology, but invest in them, have them take education, have them take courses that help them build what the next stage of their actual job is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely an employee satisfaction component to all of it, right? I mean, if you talk to them about robotics, you scare the bejesus out of them. If you're talking about bionics and not doing the rote tasks, you can get them on board, I think, not fast, but reasonably fast.
I guess like one way to look at this is the 4 revolutions that people spoke about in slides earlier on. They've always been disruptive. In the north of England, this is going way back, but in the north of England, they used to take 50 people to harvest a field of grain, and then a steam-powered tractor turned up. Those people are, what do? They move into factories, and then factories get automated. It's an evolution, and I think it's as leaders, you guys in this room, I think it's there's a little bit of burden upon us to make sure that that people have a goal to go after, and we can empower them and educate and enable them to leverage this technology so as they can move forward and their kids can move forward. One of the really interesting questions we get when we go in and speak to the banks is, what do I tell my kids to do? Like how do I educate my children so as they have a job in the future? They'll pick it up. The technology, it's kind of embedding into them pretty naturally, and things that are really strange and scary to us are just going to be natural to them. So they will pick it up, and over the next 5 to 20 years, the AI revolution will just kind of be embedded into society. I know that's a really high level topic, and there's a whole bunch of nuance to it. But I'm ever the optimist with these sort of things. I think it can definitely change both from a business standpoint as well as societal.
And just as a very practical example, I can attest to the fact that my 2-year-old daughter speaks to Google like it's, and so we have started to teach her manners through how she speaks with Google, because we used to be very demanding with Google, and then we realized that she was becoming demanding with others, and we thought we need to say please and thank you to Google so that she understands that that's how you interact with technology.
My wife goes around turning them off. She's sick of all this "Hey Google" everywhere.
So continuing along the journey, we've talked about what are some of the examples. We talked about how you identified the problem. We talked about the change management process. Let's talk about some of the obstacles. This is not an easy journey. Data has obviously been flagged as a key issue that companies need to turn their minds to. As a lawyer, I agree. I think that's a very important thing. But talk about some of the obstacles. Like what do you see as some of the challenges to integrating AI?
I think one of them is just data collection and time, right? I mean, I touched on it earlier, but people always want to talk about pricing. And I think the speech goes something like, we underwrite based on a credit file, it's static, it's backwards looking, we've got all of this mobile, geospatial, social data. It's complicated, but I'm going to AI it, and then I'm going to price differently. And I think you have two huge obstacles. The first is no one's collecting it. Certainly no one in regulated financial institutions is collecting it. And the second is, once you collect it, you have to watch it. You have to watch it at the very least over a vintage, and if you want to be confident, over a full credit cycle. So I think that's coming, but there's a lot of time between here and there.
Yeah, some of the obstacles, I think, it definitely goes back to clean data, as some of the folks have mentioned. I've talked about, kind of bringing all the data into one place. But I think it ties back to, set a short-term goal, a business objective, whether it is, brand awareness or, customer acquisition or some form of retention, define what that use case is. And, I always use the concept of try and fail fast. It's okay. It's technology. And that's the beauty of the world we live in now. It enables us to do that. So, I think don't be scared of the technology, embrace it, and kind of dip your toe in the water, start to see some of those returns. If you're not, then you can quickly pivot and, kind of try the next thing.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much as a blocker. I mean, you guys have already covered the big ones, but I don't know if it's so much as a blocker, but an extra step that you have to think about. It's transparency and privacy. With everything going on, people want to know that their data there's a privacy around it. They want you to be transparent in terms of how are you actually using their data. It's just something you're going to have to keep in mind, especially with GDPR and everything that's moving over here in Canada. It's only a matter of time. So it's just something you got to keep in mind.
I think one last thing to add to that is it kind of goes to your point about starting and failing fast. I think you need to bring the whole organization along, like get the security guys involved, get the business side of the organizations involved, make sure they're bought into this, because the last thing you want is going into meetings where someone has no appreciation for what it is you're trying to do, and all of a sudden they become a blocker. So really try to educate and enable your organizations on this, and then start kind of moving forward.
So I've identified a few components to what I think might be part of an AI strategy that you referred to. We've talked about having priorities of the company, know what they are, understand your data. That's both in the context of privacy, but it's also in the context of what do you have and how clean is it and what can you do. Recognize the change management component and the employee buy-in to the process of AI, and bring the whole organization along to make sure that there's full buy-in by the company. And then finally, there's the transparency and privacy components that you've got to be mindful of where you need a transparent, open, white-boxed algorithm as opposed to a black box system. Finally, one of the last questions I want to ask to you is, looking to the future, we're 5 years from now, what is AI in the lending space going to look like? Where are we going, and what happens if you don't start incorporating AI today, in your view?
Yeah, so I think we saw kind of a glimpse of it earlier today with For Finance, like being able to apply and have funds in your account within 5 seconds instead of 15 seconds. That's going to be one step. I also think kind of lending in itself around the assets of the home, there's a potential to totally change that. We're going to see with AR and VR, there's going to be a totally immersive experience where there's now going to be a digital self as well. So not only do you have to think about collecting all that data, think about how you're actually going to assess the risk on that, but then what is the actual lending criteria around all of that as well?
Yeah, I actually think the next 5 years are going to be pretty tactical and maybe a little bit less exciting than everyone wants to hear, but some of it's just taking stuff that isn't even about financial services. It's the chatbots and everything else. I think there's a lot of early stage automation. I think there's a lot of customer experience, but I don't think the landscape is changing tomorrow. But if you don't start now, we're going to have this conversation in 5 years and you're really going to be behind that.
Yeah, it's like you need the foundations of the house to be built and stable and safe. And I think the next couple of years are going to be that. Now, 5 years is an extremely long horizon in AI, considering Jeff Hinton made the breakthrough with back propagation in 2012. So you think about that in the last 5 years and where we are, it's crazy town. But I think you are right. I don't think we're going to see there will be some unicorns that will turn up that are doing some really crazy stuff in a good way. But then I think from the flip side for you guys is it's a good time to start getting the house in order. It's a good time to start looking at these processes and policies that have potentially been in place for 20, 30 years in some of your organizations. And the other side of it is influencing kind of regulatory bodies. Some of them to the last panel is some of those things have been in place for way too long. And I think that there is change afoot there. I think the regulatory bodies are looking at that and trying to update from where they were to where things are going. It's happening a little bit faster in different countries. As an example, in Australia, they went from you're not allowed to send anything to the cloud. They got influenced by the financial services industry down there to, if you go to the cloud, you actually have to go to 2 cloud providers to ensure that there's resiliency and redundancy across the platform. So things are happening. Singapore is another hotbed of change for regulation. Canada's getting there. It's there's a reason why the Canadian financial institutions are the way they are, how safe and secure they are. But at the same time, we're in a global market. So if you are talking to regulators, you should try and kind of give them some insight into your business and what you're trying to do.